Hey everybody, I'm Eric Erlock, and this is another talk on philosophy, German idealism, and another talk following the first on Hegel. Hey, wait a minute. Hey, buddy. And we have a friend who, again, is trying, he hears me talking, and he feels he might be able to get a treat out of the deal and the process. You know. And I give the cat a kiss, and I set this cat free yet again. So, we already gave a talk here, we, the royal we, as Yakko says, Animaniacs looking into the Queen's mouth. How many of you are there? Is there of you in there? And my words out of my mouth. That Hegel is going to be responsible for many, many, many long passages of German, ye Geist. But he also is very important for his phenomenology of spirit and or mind and or Geist, sometimes called the phenomenology of mind, sometimes called the phenomenology of spirit, which is social and individual. Again, Fichte'd that for you. And we have been talking about Kant and German idealism, and then Fichte, and then Schelling, and identity being, and concepts and reality being social and psychological as phenomenology and German idealism. So we've been working from Kant to Fichte to Schelling, and then through the intro to Hegel. So this is another talk on Hegel following the first, and assuming that you have worked through a bit of that, and talking about the major structure and overall flight path of Hegel's history of thought, his phenomenology of mind and or spirit and or Geist, and his logic, Hegel's psychology as a phenomenologist and German idealist. So the word psychology is not yet a term, as I always mention, yet. And then that becomes a more specialized kind of science, but philosophy is doing increasingly German psychology under the guise and geist of phenomenology, as well as idealism. How does the mind and ideas structure reality and what we get through perception and experience? These guys are post-British empiricism. They believe, along with Hume and Berkeley and others, that we get our reality through our senses, and yet it seems the mind shapes reality. So how does it do that according to German idealism, Kant, and post-Kantian German and French thinkers? Which is much of the long series of talks we're going to continue to have here for this class, and series on modern European philosophy. Again, getting into the basic ideas of German and French thinkers in series is something seriously cool, and still forms a lot of the art and very human emotions and mind we've always had as a species, I would say, for at least over 100,000 years. And yet, these are the ways that we understand these things best, psychologically, and anthropologically, as far as the greater, later, most printed thinkers, as far as that counts, in history. So with Kant and Hegel being two of the most important of German thinkers ever, and then we are going to get to Nietzsche and Heidegger, as well as the Schopenhauer, and a bit of the Kierkegaard. He is a great Dane, so perhaps Borges bit him. For Hegel, Kant misunderstood reason as merely a higher form of understanding. I get in philosophy a lot that what reason's job is to collect knowledge and then not contradict knowledge. That's very Kant, but that's not very Hegel. For Hegel, reason is revolutionary, and that's very Marcuse and the Father of the New Left in the 60s, technically late 50s, 60s and stuff. How I picked up more of Hegel more comprehensively, and I would say competently, after actually having a class in it as an undergrad, more in grad school. Again, if you want good Hegel, you can read some of Marcuse's Reason and Revolution. I highly recommend that text, The Rise of Hegel in the Social Sciences. It explains, Marcuse says, Americans don't understand Hegel's logic. They get stuck in the phenomenology and its impenetrable forest of language. It's super effective in the Pokemon game, back and forth as a rhetorical strategy. Forest of language, Kant is like categorical glasses. Hegel's like impenetrable forest of language. I choose you, and it's like bang, it's super effective German, somewhat. So with all of that, you basically have Hegel and Kant, and German thought is very forest of language with, again, the woods onward here. And hopefully we see the trees. So for Hegel, reason is a revolutionary force that doesn't just add to understanding and knowledge, it overturns them. And this sets up something like a more duck rabbit, if you know the optical illusion of a duck rabbit. That's very Wittgenstein, and I love mentioning the duck rabbit a lot. That's not Hegel. But what Hegel is saying is great geniuses look at truth more as a duck rabbit, and they see how people see it from opposite sides, and then they revolutionary-wise move forward dialectically. He believes Kant has gotten stuck in his glasses at a certain stage, and Kant has not seen how the philosophy that opposes his needs to be joined together triangularly and triangulated into a higher synthesis and higher form of oppositions and contradictions. For Hegel, Kant does not admit contradiction is truth and the movement of truth, but back and forth between human sides. Hegel says we need to see positive truth is the back and forth motion of opposed contradictory sides. Kant did not admit to that enough. He starts to set up the frame for Hegel and then fails where Hegel very much sees and believes himself to carry Kant's work forward and opposite itself to truly then, past Fichte and Schelling, get the history of what looks like the French Revolution in everything, is what Hegel argues. This is, again, that's the distillation nutshell of the last talk. If you want to understand that a little bit more, please see the last talk and the one before that and onward ever still. So, while understanding works by non-contradiction, Hegel very much argues that we have understanding, which is something like conservative Republican dad in the head that wants to separate out contradictions and get things rooted into their categories. I like to sometimes, hilariously, after Marcuse, father of the New Left, mention that Hegel is somewhat presenting history as if it is, and Hegel would not put it this way, a knife fight combo picnic, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, between a Republican dad and liberal hippie girl. And like they're kind of having, father-daughter kind of event here where it's both combination, fight, cooperation. And so you have kind of conservative dad is trying to separate out the pieces and make them fully separate, which is understanding and knowledge. But then for Hegel, there's a contradictory force, reason. He thinks that Kant didn't understand that reason is not just a super understanding. That's failing to see why reason is opposed and separate to understanding and not just, well, why not more understanding? Why aren't we just robots who don't understand how to plot twist? And why do we just not add math to math and get more math? Well, or add positive to positive and get more positive, such that maybe even quantizing things like math was never even necessary. Well, because we don't just add knowledge to knowledge without having perspective and wisdom. So what Hegel is saying, that's a lot of loose words for a lot of stuff there, but Hegel is saying Kant gets the positive glasses and he gets how knowledge is understanding, but what he doesn't understand, as Kant himself right before Hegel separates, and Fichte and Schelling, separates out reason as a revolutionizing force. Kant sees the revolution science is in Newtonian life, and Newton, like Hegel and Kant, think it's the clockwork of Almighty. Most traditionally, for a lot of folks today, that all of this deistic rationalism is the ye old mind of God coming down creation-wise on earth as Europeans being into science and math and algebra, Islamic algebra, etc., and onward, that this is a revolutionary thing that's turning the Catholic Church into Lutheranism for Hegel, and so it certainly is ranking old religion with newer science, and we are coming to revolutionary new perspectives. Hegel is very revolutionary like that, and then of course he very much ends up as Republican dad, and it's like, and now it's German Lutheranism, now we can all go home, we're good. And of course, anybody who's a post-Hegelian thinker would say, sure, what do I expect? Oh wait, plot twist, what a twist. What do you think is going to happen? More Hegelian dialectics. And then it's onward into the jungle never ending with Nietzsche is where we're going to go. And I will with Nietzsche do a bit of Marx versus Nietzsche, objective versus subjective truth, beard versus mustache. Again, fight, the endless struggle. I have given up. Again, I am both beard and mustache. And yet the struggle continues, with my hair and cats. So with all of that in most revolutionary re-understandings, and my backflips of reason and silliness, both serious and silly at the same time, I insist that reason is a contradictory force in the human mind. In fact, Hegel says, as I love mentioning, the feeling of being in contradiction with oneself is the feeling of being alive. If life is ever a tense struggle, and I think it is often, well, remember that actually that's kind of the energy that makes everything happen, and hopefully, not always, that makes it a little bit easier. There are forces a passing through us. I feel the spirit of history moving through us this evening. It's actually the middle of the day. But either time, effectively, things move around a lot as the ye old mind of God on earth for Hegel, and so this is the French Revolution and everything that's meant to happen. I mean, yes, it's breaking the eggs to make the omelet, comrade, but that's the fall and the return of Neoplatonism we just had with Schelling. you can see why Hegel could work all this together, and this is all very agreeable to a lot of human psychology, of course, and understandings. And in fact, I don't mean thus false. I mean that, yes, I think that this is a lot of how humanity would think, but this is a very German early 1800s putting it all together with the modern sciences and new anthropology and the beginnings of what is going to be psychology and anthropology coming up in the world. Not yet, though. That's late 1800s, early 1900s. And we're still in the early 1800s. But it's all a la Newton and clockwork and pendulums, as described. Hegel thinks Kant is a stuck pendulum that didn't swing back the opposite way enough. And again, well, Kant doesn't swing that way, baby, So, aside from my jokes, which hopefully keep you entertained and into the material, as is expected and not so much. Otherwise, it would not be humor. Kant wants to keep metaphysics of Leibniz, if you remember, with Leibniz pure. He wants non-contradiction. He wants that principle. For Hegel, it's hilariously both it's both non-contradiction and contradiction in contradiction with itself. That would be understanding trying to separate things in you and reason trying to move things around. So in order to give a clear example, I oftentimes like to say, let's say that we're at the combo picnic knife fight between dad and daughter here, between Republican and hippie girl. So what you would have is that understanding says cows are cows, horses are horses, gotta keep them separate. Which of course you do, because you need to say, give me a cow, not a horse, and then we understand that, ba-bang. But you also have to say, but how are like cows like horses and horses like not like cows? We need to like ask more speculative questions, man. And it's like, shut up, you hippie, hippie punching. Is that it's like, no, and this is abuse, again, imaginary, so it does not exist, don't worry. Is that we have here, of course, in my subtle misogynies, we have here that, my rhetoric moves us again out of the room and into other legalities, clearly, that effectively, of course, our minds have to keep things nice and separate, which of course, dad and daughter and things I am already playing on here a bit. Yes? So then you have, of course, but we got to be like inclusive and like stuff like that. We have to like have contradictory forces. Again, I do enjoy thinking all about the expressions of masculinity and femininity found throughout art and signaled, to and at and with people and behavior, and very Judith Butler and Berkeley and all of that kind of thing. And very much in the Birdcage, I imagine the writers of that may or may not have heard of Butler plenty, is that it's, how do you, the male partner trying to teach his male partner how to act more masculine. And he's like, the guys the football team didn't beat the spread. How do you feel about that? Instead of, yeah, screw those guys. He's like, how do you think I feel? Bewildered, betrayed? Is that there is something actually, while misogyny tends to sort of align women with a lack of reasoning. Of course, actually, men and women all expect men to be kind of closed and women kind of open, which is actually why poker face sung sounds more interesting out of a woman. Whereas if a guy's like, I got a poker face, it's like, well, of course you do, Steve. Man up here. You're supposed to have one. You're supposed to repress your emotions, Steve, a little bit, unlike the lady folk. So basically, of course, with this, it's like women are actually known for being more social and like, I want to ask questions, I want to interact, whereas men are classically, go ask your mother. Not that anybody has to conform to any stereotypes at all. My family doesn't entirely at all. And heck, people are people. And I grew up in land of questioning that aplenty, and not so down under even. So again, over easy with all of this and the creations. And yes, the machinations of all the culture. So with all of this, again, in my Hegelian silly picnic knife fight thing, I am actually trying to convey overall that Hegel sees understanding and knowledge as keeping things separate and steady in the mind. We have another part of mind interwoven with that, but separate, which is reason, which moves things around and questions things, and he physically thinks that's the right and left of the French Revolution, of separating into the wings. That would also be Congress today and their 11% approval rating, or lower. I haven't checked, nor will I. Again, I'm trying to steer clear of quantities as much as possible. Clear and quantities, and thus, compared to other odd things for Wittgenstein, quite queer and odd. Much love and happiness to all of our folk. So, and yay, Bay, and again, Bay, Aryan nation, much understanding and love. So, if understanding's for Hegel, if the conservative part of all of our minds, and perhaps here conservatives are more so that, and progressives are more so something else, and we're all of that is definitely what I am suggesting, because if your head is a combo kind of picnic knife fight between dad and daughter, then actually we're all of this, plenty, is what I am suggesting, and I do most loosely and openly because that's kind of an amazing model, and I am doing it post-Marcuse, Father of the New Left, with the dad-daughter hippie girl thing on purpose to make it a memorable, weird, silly image, and my apologies. But if understanding was perfect, if Republican Dad could just lock up the gated community and everything would be fine, and we have knowledge pure and simple, we're done, there would be no need for reason to question anything. Of course, as Dad would say, go ask your mother. Just as if knowledge was complete and absolute, there would be no need for wisdom or questions or change or new scientific theory rather than Newtonian law post-Einstein. And if authority and culture was simply good and just, there would be no need for counterculture or revolution. Now notice, of course, let's just back away from the point as to whether culture or counterculture knows what the heck it's doing, and let's just say dad and daughter both are here. So, with all of that, you obviously have your preferences and not, and in fact, each individual and culture is a very interesting combination. Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, nowadays in Hong Kong. So understanding's job, as Kant recognized, is to create exclusive categories for experience. But reason has a different job, to create ideas that synthesize the understandings. Think about how art is countercultural, and we have, and again, I'm going to get into surreal films at some point, although probably in videos not specifically for this class, but it'll be hard for me not to talk about films when talking about Nietzsche and the presentation of meaning being crazy and interpretation. Reason's job is actually to contradict understanding and come up with different possibilities. Poe says it's not certainty that's most brilliant, it's possibility. That would very much be Poe, who seems like he kind of, like Carroll, knows a bit of Kant and Hegel, but probably second hand and not very well. Poe seems rather dialectical right around years just after this in America. He seems like an educated guy who knows French, and I don't think so much German nor German thinkers. But as the French are getting into all of this and other things, and reading in the French, Poe would, is that it is reason's job, actually, to be the French Revolution and contradict things. Like that's, so we're supposed to come up with weird contrary art and Poe would plot twists. We're supposed to come up with weird things that throw your mind inside out. And notice how, of course, I don't want to get lost in this and that film, but films almost are designed to throw you, more than makes sense in many ways. That's surrealism, and they think that's good for you, and we oftentimes feel that's good art, or not so much, depending on your tastes. This is very much that where reason's job, and we have post-Hegelian thinker, which is post-Republican Dad, and Lutheranism is the final form of culture for older Hegel, still died in his 40s from a plague. Could have gone on to write a lot more work. The great leaps of human thought and paradigm shifts and ruptures is more French, later post-Hegelian, but very Hegelian, post-Hegelian Nietzschean thought, is going to say the leaps and ruptures and revolutions and the great leaps of humor and my terrible jokes, they're designed, of course, to enlighten. It's designed to basically, because that's the flashes of enlightenment and reason that the good heavens and everything else all together makes. So reason's job is not just to complement and continue the understanding and continue to say, yes, the powers that be are fine. Reason's job is to continuously contradict understanding and authority in life and thought. Hegel thinks German Lutheranism did that plenty. Now could be, safely, the establishment, and that would not be so countercultural anymore, of course. So for Hegel, Kant tries to basically tame reason and straighten it up and make it a super understanding, and that is completely misunderstanding. I remember Kant's routine broke to read a newspaper, it is said, talking about the French Revolution, although I almost could imagine that would be a Hegelian making up that as a parable of some kind, and it becomes fact rather than fiction. But I am to understand that that's not a story merely told, and that Kant breaks his routine and his walk past grandfather clocks set to him because of the French Revolution, which would be a break in Kant's thought, as Hegel most certainly tried to be, while also being very, very much a Kantian. In a weird way, actually, many people have pointed out nowadays, Heidegger even, who is post-Nietzsche running away with the game, and into the jungle and out into the Rhineland and such, and over the log bridges, Gesundheit, is for Heidegger. Heidegger is very much a Kantian thinker. Heidegger doesn't, and he is very much the last of the Germans, much of the last of the Germans we will mention so much. And that guy, he is very Hegelian. He doesn't try to look it, but he is very Hegelian, and he is also very Kantian and concerned with Kant. And again, Zizek then, as a man of the Germanic lands and lands eastward and less meaningful, of course, with the strange utterances of Zizek, I insist, as an American. We have regular fancy talking, not fancy walking, For Hegel and for Zizek, Kant is centrally important, but he is far too square, man. He is trying to put everything in a box. He is not seeing the backs and forths that are clearly the motions of history. And as I started to get into men and women, it very much is symbolized not only in Taoism and in cultures all over the world, and then Jung tries to come along as a fellow, Germanic person, a little too German, and then tries to make the world's cultures into saying something archetypal. Men and women often are portrayed as something like dogmatism and skepticism, something like established authority versus counterculture and something like lessening up the interaction, and something like and establishing and closing the gates, and something like opening up the gates and communicating back and forth. Close the gate, open the gate a little, as the somewhat transphobic comic does say. There is a popular, may as well say, of course, joke online in meme-ish form and it comes from, I believe it is a Germanic, I think it's like a Swedish comic, and forgive me for not knowing my white culture specifically, of course, I'm an American. Is that it's an old sort of medieval cartoon, and there's two guys, and they're sort of Viking looking, and they have or medieval, kind of era looking, and there's a castle, and one of them is saying, there's someone coming, and the guy's like on the lever of the castle gate, and it's just the same static two images, and the other guy's like, close the gate, and he's like operating the gate, and the guy's like, he says, is there somebody coming? And he's like, close the gate. And he's like, it's a person, he's like, open the gate. I think I'm complexifying this too much. And he's like, it's a lady man, meaning it's a trans person. He's like, close the gate. And he's like, with a nice form, let's say, nice, better half. And the guy's like, open the gate a little, which of course is playing on transphobia. And it's like, he's like, oh no, it's a trans person. Then he's like, who's very nice looking. He's like, well, open the gate a little bit, actually, Steve, says Adam. And it's like, yes, it's playing on transphobia, homophobia. And of course, that people are like, well, I'm curious now. And so obviously it's playing on all of that. This is actually men and dogmatism in the history of human thought. Is very much, if I sound like I'm waxing, far too much on and not off enough. And with all of this thing, it's like, close the gate is dogmatism and understanding and knowledge, and then reason and art. Continental thought wants to be art, analytic thought wants to be science, as somebody once said, and I don't remember who or whom, but it's an amazing open thought in spite of me not having the knowledge all locked down, is that where our minds are trying to lock things down, our minds are trying to leap opposite and contradict ourselves most oppositely. Not just like 35 degrees or something or other. No, most opposite, as Hegel dialectics all say. Then in being most opposite, of course, and contrary-wise, as Tweedledee and Dumb say to Alice back and forth, and against each other in the battle for the rattle, is that Hegel very much thinks everything in motion is contradiction, opposed elements, and Kant does not get that with categorical thought. He's trying to make reason into a form of understanding rather than a contradictory force in the mind that moves all things around in terms of opposites, back against things. That's a very powerful core psychology before psychology as phenomenology and German idealism. Let me read you here in Hegel's Logic, which is very much where he centrally says some of the ideas he decided to clear in a more clear way, not so clear enough for plenty of academics, tell you what psychology ideas are core here to his whole history of thought after he's done with his history and his phenomenology. And we are going to, again, get to the overall structure of both of these books, his history of thought and his logic of thought. In the Logic, which he wrote second, he says, contradiction is the root of all movement and life. Think politics. I know everybody's thinking a lot of politics or trying not to, back and forth, right? Okay, right and left and forms like that of psychology are everything. How much do you think people thought this was important in the 60s? Or thought anything about this kind of thinking in the Black American community? And I will get to all of that as we go along through existentialism. All things are contradictory in themselves. Force which can both comprehend and endure contradiction. That is becoming as being and non-being in the ancient Greek world and ancient Indian and Chinese world. Unfortunately, Hegel doesn't really see that at all. In China, not at all. And in India, he sees it as starting at zero and not moving from it. Rather than understanding Buddhist thought was well into all of the kind of formulae he is formulating. Hegel continues. Kant, as we must add, calling Guy out, never got beyond the negative result that the thing in itself is unknowable. completely, and never penetrated to the discovery of what the opposite, the antinomies, which are certain oppositional points of view Kant thinks can't be sort of resolved, really and positively as an unresolvable things and issues mean. The fact that human beings don't resolve opposition has a positive and definite meaning. That is very core genius part of Hegel here, whether or not you're Hegelian or like it. That true and positive meaning of the antinomies, of basic questions of life that remain opposed and kind of like we could look at the duck rabbit either way, is the easiest way I can tell you that in so few words. Is the meaning of duck rabbits in life is that every actual thing involves a coexistence of opposed elements. It is, as Zizek kind of points out with jumping around with your eye and closing one eye and not, and I like Wittgenstein saying closing one eye and not shows you things. If you look at your finger and you stare at it, your eyes are opposed because you can see it jump back and forth as you close either eye. The positive meaning of your finger being three-dimensional is a good example in a weird way of your eyes are opposed and the same both. So as you look at a thing with your eyes and you have three-dimensionality, that's because of the positive value of opposed elements in your eyes and in your life. So you're actually using understanding and reason like two eyes, and yes, this stuff is symbolized in ancient thought, Greek and Indian stuff, somewhat, although this is a certain formula for it, and I'm not saying it's perfectly the truth or India or anything. But there's a lot of Buddhist thought that works like this. There's the stable, there's the moving. People were very fascinated by all that. What stays on the ground, what moves around in the air like birds and thoughts and ideas. The fish in the sea, the birds in the air, all symbolic. And if we look at the oppositions and we stare outside the hut enough at reality and we see the back and the forth, we can come to conclusions and categories, but we can also see that life is and isn't categorical. And that in being categorical or not, it is tension and it is alive and it is the motions of life and not simply still and dead. There is a great play in Hegel and then in art afterwards. That's German and French art, and then that's a lot of art today, period, all over the place, all over the world, influenced. That understanding that emotions, meaning, truth, and other things are not just categorical, but then not just dogmatic and a bullet list of facts about apples, but actually are the living back and forth about explaining apples or not for certain human purposes that continue to go, is the way of simply understanding what is going on in German thought here, where knowledge is not a set bullet list of things. It's, as Wittgenstein gets to, I will get in the end, practices and forms of life, which are in motion. So knowledge, if you hear today people say, well, knowledge is sort of in motion or socially constructed, people are like, oh, so everything's relative, I can believe in anything, and that's math. No, because it's the back and forth motions of history and life, so you don't just freely go to it completely with no thrownness and conditioning and say, I just pick math out of nowhere. But you are opposed to and involved with math and life and law and other things and gender, ethnicity, meaning, wealth, and poverty, and we're thrown into the world and we are in motion in it. This is very much where a bunch of German and French thinkers are going to take this kind of thinking in Hegel, and then I got to get to Marcuse in grad school, and he says, Americans don't understand Hegel, here you go, and a bunch of left-wing people are like, wow, this is amazing. Well, guess why? You know, this is thinking we can all understand and appreciate. I, of course, admit to being a lefty and then say, but this is really history of thought. And honestly, if you're a smart left or righter, you would understand this stuff. And I mean, there already are smart left and right-wing people. I'm not going to be silly that way. And yeah, people know Hegel. They know what he said. They can talk to you about it. I know many right and left-wing people in my life. I also know fewer people who understand Hegel, but I know right and left-wing people in my life who do understand Hegel quite powerfully. And in fact, Hegel was then taken as right-wing Hegelianism and was used by the Austrian state, and then was also taken to be left-wing, which is more like Republican Dad Hegel final Lutheranism. This isn't even its final form with DBZ. Although now it is somewhat. So, as with all of that, Hegel basically is Republican Dad, but you can take this as Marxist and anarchistic as you want to go, and that itself is opposed between Marxist stability and anarchism, which is more formlessness. On the left and right on the left, as somewhat sort of hard socialism versus open-ended anarchism. The red and the black flags, as I will get to with Beard versus Mustache, Marx versus Nietzsche, fight. In a certain sense, Antifa and having the red and black flags or intertwined or other things is sort of an open call to the left and that sort of symbol, because it would be in the late 1800s, after this and Marx and a bunch of stuff, hard kind of forms of socialism and other things got a bit too dogmatic for some folks who started to leave that, the red flag as the black flag as anarchism, which is where anarchist theorists come from. actually. So with all of this stuff, whether or not you like Antifa at all or Republican Hegelian Lutheranism, Dad, all of this are the back and forth motions of our lives. There's no reason to not just get into this, and then you are welcome to think about these thinkers, the ways you want. But as Hegel says, to know or to comprehend any object, anything, the French Revolution, the Democratic Party, and Apple, is to be conscious of it as like my finger with both eyes open, as a concrete unity of opposed determinations. The old metaphysic, as we have already seen, Hegel is saying, quoting, I continue. He means Kant, the old metaphysic, the categorical, the static knowledge, the dead. There's a big theme in art in Hegel, as I was starting to say, of the living versus the dead. Knowledge in a book is dead. Practices of life are alive is very much a metaphor going on here. The old dead metaphysic of categorical knowledge and faculties of mind for Kant, which isn't so child development or historical development for Hegel. He ignores child development, but he sort of is talking about it the whole time, as we'll get to here. Now that's post-Piaget and French. The old metaphysic, Hegel says, as we have already seen, Kant and categories, when it studied the objects of which it sought a metaphysical static dead knowledge, went to work by applying categories abstractly and to the exclusion of their opposites. However reluctant understanding may be to admit the action of dialectic, no matter how strong our minds are in trying to keep our categories and knowledge straight. We must not, Hegel says, suppose, that the recognition of its existence is peculiarly confined to the philosopher. What he means is, don't just think this is philosophy. It would be truer to say that dialectic gives expression to a law, Newtonian law. Before now we talk about theory after Einstein a lot instead of law with science. Much. That it gives expression to a Newtonian kind of law in a pendulum, which is felt in all other grades of consciousness, all art, history, religion, and in general experience, individual life. You're walking to the store, this is your mind. Everything that surrounds us may be viewed as an instance of dialectic. Now, and what he is saying is, and I love teaching logic, and this stuff all fits with my logic talks very much, and I am trying to get a lot of European stuff done, and then I'm going to turn back to very much a bit of East Asia, and then also the logic talks, and try to focus on those. Logic is either based very much in Leibniz and Kant's principle of non-contradiction, or you could also give somewhat openness to logic works contradictory-wise and non-contradictory-wise. And I am of the honest opinion nobody has well figured this stuff very well out, and Wittgenstein is the latest and greatest for me. Foucault is also amazing. There's lots of amazing people. But Wittgenstein and Foucault, I'm going to walk us all the way out to. And that's the latest and greatest of what you're getting right here. It's, again, what this is right here is extremely important for a lot of French, German and then French stuff and modern art that I love and hold dear. And it's very important for actually... for Black American thought and philosophy. It's very important in a lot of different ways and a lot of cool stuff. Latin America is very into Hegel, and of course, socialism, Marxist thought, lots of stuff, and whether or not you do or don't like conservatism, socialism, anarchism, all of these things come from the French Revolution and Hegelian thinking a lot. That's the roots of a lot of all of these positions we all need to better figure out. Let's hope, and hey, let diversity ring and all of these ways go off, As long as we're nice and have conversation about it, back and forth. It's very much what we're talking about with lively lives and reason and openness and closure. Everything is contradiction. Everything is Newtonian pendulums. Everything is contradictory. And if you say logic is non-contradictory, Hegel would say, yes. Why? Because logic is non-contradiction, understanding, and contradiction, reason. If you have to understand one thought of all of Hegel, of all of Marcuse, thought is and is not contradiction. Now, what is the shape of that? Is that coherent, or is that contradictory? And does it form a very nice Zen-like circle with a strange break somewhere and it's hard to leap over it? Or it is, you just do that, Goes around and around forever. Again, Nicholas of Cusa says maybe the soul's immortal, because you can see all of that in a circle. This is very similar to Thomas Kuhn's idea in more modern speak of paradigm shift, which is very somewhat French and rupture. There's a good image of Thomas Kuhn I have online I've used to illustrate the notes with, which is him shifting in perspective in a photograph. And so the photographer very much did a portrait of Thomas Kuhn visually being shifted, which of course is most intentional, I imagine, and looks most artificial in the very specific shifting of the image rather than a continuous blur. And that's great. That's amazing. Good modern art and simple silliness with that. So basically what Thomas Kuhn argues, and in fact I will try to make a video just about him and more philosophers of science later in the game, and he is an Anglophonic of the Anglophonic folks like myself, English speaking, is that what he says is very Hegelian, but he's leaving it open-ended and very much after Nietzsche and a bit more in French, sort of thinking land, but he's more of the Anglophonic science, philosophy of science ilk. But he is going more skeptical than Popper would like, most certainly. Popper tried to stop it. That's, as Popper's student, that basically if we have paradigm shifts, you have rupture, you can't follow the old model, and the old society cannot handle all the new pressures and problems. So it builds up resistance, and culture and counterculture build up, but eventually something has to give, and then you have a new Napoleon, and that's very Hegel. You have the old and the new, it becomes a rupture, and then a war, and then a break, and a French Revolution, and then it re-solidifies, and these things are unfortunately human. Now notice how much our own culture actually assumes all that, and then very much in the Bhagavad Gita, what is the most amazing thing? That we each see everyone around us die or be weak, and we do not believe that each of us will die or have any weakness, and be solid in logic. So I am paraphrasing all of that from the longest of human epics, and from the best creamy center part. So for a time, culture supports the model and the culture, but the countercultures persist, and then all that continues, but that is what creates rupture, revolution, and shift in paradigms or otherwise, and in politics. That is very much Hegel, that's very much Thomas Kuhn. That is the core idea to understand here, whether you like it or lump it, or I do. And we've been seeing a lot of pendulums within pendulums lately, in a lot of amazing ways. That is life, dear fellow. As Husselbeck says, the Dada artist and manifesto writer. Well, if your wife falls off the Eiffel Tower and freezes to death, and if you lose your jacket on your silver wedding anniversary, and if more absurd things happen than that, well, then that, contradictory-wise and most absurdist-wise, before Camus wins the Nobel Prize, is life, dear fellow. And that is most, and Husselbeck also says, dialectics is the fine art of glancing, and he's a German dude with that name, is the fine art of glancing at your opponent's position like Kant before declaring yourself to be the winner, as Hegel does certainly himself. I would imagine Husselbeck is thinking of Kant to Hegel and saying, and now let us proudly declare ourselves the final Lutherans, is what a Dada artist would certainly say of their own German culture. He actually also, Husselbeck, I often don't mention actually, or have forgotten to, but I used to mention a little bit more. Husselbeck says the Germans are the master vaudeville dissemblers. They're the magicians of modern culture who can conjure a spirit in order to protect their weak, soft, exposed bellies, is what he says. Which, of course, is fantastic, poetic, surreal, pre-surreal Dada language for how do we nationalize. And as a German who's cynical about nationalism in World War I, let alone the crazed German nationalism of World War II, of course, and I think Husselbeck is in Switzerland for just this sort of reason during World War I with the fellow Dada folks playing chess, occasionally with Lenin, and then thinking outside the box of all of that, and I'm stalling for time. And with all that, he says, yeah, don't we love in the finest of nation states with the finest of science to conjure up mythological fetishes and then hold these invisible beings in front of our bellies? I happen to say it's like I write fiction, and I am going to continue to talk out my Itzy the Spider routine, which I like, and I try to make very Wittgensteinian, and I am bringing in bits of all of this stuff into that. And there is a joke that I like to tell about it. You wouldn't think an ape would hide inside something invisible, would you? Like an idea. Apes love to hide in ideas, don't they? They love hiding in invisible things. I am paraphrasing Husselbeck. Like, that's just because it's like, why would an ape try to hide behind an idea? That's silly. Ideas are invisible. Well, Nietzsche's going to get into much more Heraclitus, how we're all apes, right after this. After Schopenhauer's more pessimistic, but very much right after this. Why would an ape try to hide in an idea? You'd think they wouldn't you? But who am I talking to? So, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and we're just quickly going to mention the most barest of the details of each of his history of thought and logic, because what we're actually doing is just showing the 3 waltz steps that are overall what he is saying in the history, and it is most Eurocentric, and I do like to talk about that. So I will save a lot of that for the post-colonialism. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Mind Geist, has also been translated again as Phenomenology of Mind, and this is the Geist to the Ghost. So, as said, this is sort of the spirit of the soccer team, the spirit of your mind, how it's social, individual, in your life in all different ways. For Hegel, the first stage of history is, lovingly, the Orientals. Now, when you say that, he does not mean the Chinese, when I say that. Oriental actually used to be a word that in the 1950s, still for white folks, meant Chinese, Egyptians, Native Americans, like everybody is Oriental who is not Occidental Christian. Now, Oriental is now a word that Californians are not saying in terms of East Asian people, but Oriental also is, there's been as I always have to joke, there is an Oriental rug hut that somebody even joked in the 90s has been going out of business in Marin forever. Well, Oriental rug, it is now Persian carpet or Turkish carpet, not Oriental, because you get more educated about it, and as being educated, not so ignorant, as Chris Rock says. So, Oriental actually means everybody, Egypt, South America, everybody who ain't white, and the Occident, to Christendom, and then Christendom slowly learned to say white people, more so. And even West, after Auschwitz, more so, as nice ways of saying. So it's very Oriental, Occidental. My dad actually went to Occidental. That is in L.A. That Hegel uses the term as it was used until recently, before the 1960s, to refer to, again, everybody non-European. So what Hegel actually says, now this is cool and not Eurocentric, and then immediately becomes Eurocentric. Hegel actually says that Babylon and Egypt start human culture and science. They come up with facts and dogmatism. Now that's amazing. He's actually saying that non-white people came up with objective truth, science, the state, and law. Now that's actually cool, but what he means as a Freemason kind of guy is he thinks the Egyptians aren't so African, of course, like just African non-culture people is unfortunately what the man of his time would say, and others he's hanging out with, even those who are white Freemasons thinking they're Egyptians and stuff, is that he is basically saying, no, the Babylonians and Egyptians and Persians, they came up with law, and that's what Jesus and Socrates are responding to as Jesus and then the Greeks and stuff as a Protestant Lutheran. So he thinks there's 3 stages of culture. One is the non-white people. That's actually dogmatism and science and law. Now, it's actually really cool, isn't it, that he gives them science and law, sort of. But of course, all motion after this, all development is European. First Greece, and then Western Europe, notably, guess where? Germany. So, in other words, step 1 is non-white people everywhere who actually do come up with science and objective truth. At least Hegel does not believe the Greeks invented science, as many people say. And what were Egypt and Persia doing? Not science? Dam building and temples? Okay, sure. So, with all that, you can get into arguments about people that online and in educated, more so conversations if there are. Today, I calmly would accept Hegel of the 1800s here. Yeah, Sumer effectively had something, if the Greeks did, like science. But what is Hegel suggesting? Unfortunately, Hegel does not talk of China, gives India 0, and then says Islam kind of carried stuff and also gives Islam a 0 later. But what he is saying is that the Egyptians and Sumerians and Babylonians, they start culture numero uno. They have deductive objective truth. They understand that. So I always think, of course, used to watch the 10 Commandments movie, so classic with the Thai guy playing an Egyptian prince. Of course, again, footprints and foot princesses. And he is, so shall it be written. So shall it be done. And Europeans often have an image of like Egypt and China as something where it's like bureaucracy. This is the law. And it's like, yes. And then, of course, the Israelites break away and they're like, we're fleeing Egypt and stuff. And so Hegel is very much seeing the Greeks and the Israelites, which they understood themselves very much, as popping off of earlier civilization and being a new revolutionary spirit. So in other words, Hegel probably thinks of Jesus and Socrates as white guys who pop off them Orientals who are Egyptians and the Thai guy who has a shaved head. Again, evil Dalzim, a la Persia 300. Yes? So, evil system. Notice Americans, of course, love and hate kind of the system and the military and all this sort of stuff. Much love to everyone. So it's kind of like you got to love and hate the system in a lot of dialectically, kind of oppositionally, contradictory wise ways today. Yes, much in the same left and right ways we're talking about, right? No matter what you feel about it. So in a certain sense, Egypt and Sumer are the system, and the Babylon, I always mention, it is funny, Rastafarians love singing about Babylon and freeing themselves from it. Great metaphor. It is also true that the very Jews that they are singing sort of the lyrics of the books of the prophets, which is very much the source of a lot of Rastafarianism and such, not the only source, but the many Jews, once Nebuchadnezzar was swapped out for Cyrus, a lot of Jews were like, hey, this is a great place, we're going to stay. So actually they didn't totally leave Babylon. Babylon changed and then they kicked it, and like mostly. But again, as with the diasporas, it's like, yes, it all spread around, things went every single way. But again, you have something, the culture and the counterculture a little bit in all of this stuff. So it's a very Eurocentric view that actually does give objective truth and dogmatism and science and law, and even art as a basic expression, almost Soviet realism stuff. It's like it gives culture and the founding of culture to specifically them non-Europeans. Now think about how Germans and French folks are uncovering pyramids and other artwork increasingly with anthropology getting going and becoming even a more middle-class pursuit decade by decade here. It isn't yet, but is going to be, is still a pastime a lot of the time for those who can afford it. So as archaeology is not yet, and anthropology not yet, and as these things are progressing, Hegel is saying, no, Mesopotamia and Egypt and India, they started stuff, but then they didn't really go anywhere with it. And then the Greeks went somewhere with it in stage 2, and then us Europeans complete the process as Western Europe as the final form of fully realized, fully educated and civilized back and forth of human culture. Obviously, there's plenty of views about all of that. In fact, of course, it's a bit, has been an expression of two or a group of two. Of course, white men made the modern world. That's actually kind of what Hegel is saying. I don't advocate such a viewpoint. He is actually very much framing it like that. But in this case, actually, that simple view doesn't even acknowledge here the Hegel of the 1800s, where actually law and science were established in Egypt, not them white people, if the Egyptians are not at least yeesh white. But if you mistakenly believe the Greeks were just white or called themselves that, which they didn't, and then if you think all of Western Europe is just itself pleasantly without all the gunpowder from China to Islam, then yeah, white men just simply made the progress and the positive. Notice most dogmatically, a little bit male in the thinking, is that categorically just established the world is good. So as the archaeology in Hegel's time is going, it's a good non-European start, but actually then it's Greek and German, and this is white to even whiter of stuff. This is, again, to make the horrible Simpsons jokes, is in the episode where Homer meets his long-lost brother who had to claw his way up as an orphan, blue class. So I blew myself. From Arrested Development, so I go on. Is that the white executive is like, he's like, hey, what are your roots? He says to one of the executive vice presidents of his car company. And the guy's like, well, I guess you could say that my relatives are come from when the Anglos met the Saxons. And then the other executives chuckle. And then the CEO guy who had to claw his way up from the blue collar, folks. And so he's like, you mean when white met bread, and it's like, yeah, actually funny enough to be very nice to my family, all the white people out there, I just mean my family, none of the other people. Is that, of course, with all of this, I mean, know the devil you know, not the devil you don't, is that, of course, this is actually sort of, it's them Orientals, and then when white met bread, you know what I mean? Und das Bread, yes, and das Breading, und other words, and words and Steinsens. So, with all of my fake German, and nonsensical utterances, because, of course, all Germanic utterances would be somewhat nonsensical in toto, and we ain't in Kansas anymore. That we definitely have when white met bread, and the Orientals then go onward to the Greeks and then the Germans, and that's how civilization works according to Hegel. That is actually the picture overall in the overflight of his history of human thought. So what happens actually is the Greeks understand subjectivity. They come up with art and philosophy that's more subjective, which is very much how people still somewhat frame the Greek miracle out of nowhere, as if it's not like taking pieces clearly from everything and then also revolutionizing it, which is how all of this works according to Hegel and others who aren't so Hegelian. But it's like it took the Greeks to realize subjectivity. I do like to point out it is very tribal to be in objectivity and subjectivity without those words. It is not any tribe on earth that thinks everybody thinks lockstep. I don't even think the SS folks would think, back in the day that every individual in the SS thinks entirely alike. That's probably what a lot of the goose stepping's all about. So it's not like people aren't dealing with objectivity, collectiveness, and then collective behavior and forms of life, and then individuality, subjectivity, cultural difference. That's very human to deal with in political ways and individual ways all throughout life, a la the frames we are talking about, yes? So Hegel very much is like, and then the Greeks discovered individuality and subjectivity. That is how a lot of people frame it. I would dissuade you from thinking anything like that. I would highly encourage you to think in China, Confucius says, no one can keep the humblest man from his free will and free thought. I have had students before say, wow, how, that's not so China in my mind. Yeah, but that's not so ancient Greece either. It's not, again, without getting into awful detail, objectivity and collectivity and subjectivity and individuality are something Hegel is assigning very much to Europe and white people. And unfortunately, I am somebody who likes to point out just because there is more money and power does not mean there's necessarily more individuality. And I just say that humbly and lovingly and just, hear me lovingly and openly. Please don't think that I am criticizing Europeans. I am always talking about humanity and the human mind overall. Yeah? Like the Zen say, all is mind. So as I talk about all of this complex stuff, this is all very important no matter if you're left or right and you want to think about a lot of this stuff. Clearly, this should look like I'm very lefty-lefty. If you don't like the left, you should know a lot of this stuff because what I'm describing very freely and openly and not giving a dang, Undungen, I believe, is not the German. I just made that up. So it probably isn't. If you want to know the right or the left, you probably need to know your Hegel and you need to know all of this. Because whether you like or lump that he thinks the Greeks are white and invented subjectivity, you should probably understand that's a lot of how people understand the Greeks today. And I go on and on and on. In fact, I do love to mention Jaspers, who's a German Nietzschean guy. He's amazing. I'm going to praise him later with Nietzsche. Because he's one of, he's one of Nietzsche's major interpreters. But he came up with the idea of the axial age, and he was more inclusively saying that it's actually China and India and Greece and Persia and Egypt that kind of come to an age of more subjective understanding and philosophy. I would also, as much as I love that guy and think his work is cool, I would back off Jaspers and say we don't, and this is very much more now I have read. If you look up on Wikipedia, even axial age, which is one of Jaspers' central ideas he's famous for, it's like kind of Locke and other stuff. It's good in its time, but unfortunately, we can even say that it is not a certain age of history that discovered subjectivity. But even so, he is trying to broaden Hegel's age of the Greeks into something like the axial age of the Greco-Roman, Indian, Chinese golden ages is what he is trying to do, and you notice how he's broadening it out as a German even wider. As he was kicked out of being a professor because he was married to a Jewish woman by the Nazis and then fled with his wife before anything else terrible happened. As one of the interpreters of Nietzsche who does argue, as others do, that Nietzsche is not a Nazi, he's actually very much an anti-Nazi, but he is, heavy sigh, a man of his time. So all of this, again, in my confused utterances, this does point us forward from what Hegel is saying overall about history, most square and Lutheran-wise, to the open jungle of Nietzsche. All of these ideas are going to be important because we are slowly walking our way into modern times past Darwin with all of these very German, French, and modern ideas that do inform a bunch of the concepts all around you, no matter how Anglophonic like me you are. So the third final stage, of course, is the Germans and Hegel himself. He does argue that the Lutherans, again, nailed it with Martin Luther, that in Luther and then Napoleon are actually bringing not just the communion with the Catholic Church and the priest, but the individuality of every man as a priest of his household. Hegel missays, and I almost did. Think about, of course, as I mentioned already, probably with Hegel. What do you think feminists think when Hegel says, by the way, culture's over, now we got past the Catholic Church, you don't have to go through a mediation of a priest, we can cut out the middleman, and now every man can pray straight to Jesus, and that he can serve as a vessel for his wife, and vice versa. So with all of that, it's like, yeah, all the feminists are like, yay, a German Lutheran man is going to be my conduit to God. Well, that certainly got over the middleman in the Catholic Church and the priest, didn't it, for the feminist Hegelians and Hegelian feminists in the audience? Certainly it did, and all of that, not at all. So obviously the culture keeps a churning, and you have the backs and the forths motions. It is interesting that Hegel's like, and in hindsight of the 60s, Hegel is effectively like, no, German Lutheranism is the final form of culture. Europeans have not only law with the Egyptians, we have rights and freedoms, which means anti-free law, reasoning, speculative openness forms of culture gathered as the Newtonian clockwork now. Again, that's pretty much all of culture, though, to speak more inclusively. But he's like, with German Lutheranism, now every man can be a priest. So now we're done because now you have pure individuality since every man is the head of his household, which, of course, yeah, well, guess where the game is plenty, in a lot of ways, and all of that, whether you like it, again, or lump it. So one of the most influential ideas in Hegel here, and again, as per usual, we will probably have to have another video on the logic, I imagine, and so this will be the phenomenology and the history, which makes the sense here. In fact, actually, what would be good is, since this is 55 already, I'm going to call this right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a separate, shorter video in order to chunk this up. Obviously, I've thought all this out beforehand. We're not thinking, at least y'all have to say, I'm speaking free. So, and not thinking about it too much. That would be overthinking, over easy. And again, not baking things correctly. So what we are going to do in taking our sweet time here is that I am going to stop right here, and then I'm going to create a separate video on one of the more influential ideas of the first pages of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, which is the master-slave dialectic. Some say lord and bondsman in English, and in printing still. It is master-slave, and again, reason is and ought to be the slave and fruit of the passions, according to Hume, and odd, awful, single-syllable, brute English words. Yes, but I don't dumb it down. Lord and slave, master and slave is certainly going to be useful in talking about what Hegel sees in politics and what ideas people have made use of in Hegel. Something fierce. So we will pick up here, and I will cut this video here, and we're going to pick up more with the master-slave dialectic, and I will do that, and then I will also then cover in a video the most basic of Hegel's logic. And I will leave that, again, to another video. In fact, maybe that will be one or two, or we will find out. But this will be covering, then, the ideas that are central here of Hegel, including, first and foremost, his master-slave dialectic, which has been used something fierce by Marx, feminists, anti-racists, Fanon, and very much on the big three, which is class, gender, and race. The three ways that we are very, very, very much divided and different in perspective and person and individual self and life and form in society overall, which is what you might think a bunch of academics is going to take a bunch of this German thinking and French thinking onward into. Yes, it was the 60s, kids. So yes, much love and happiness. That is a second talk on Hegel. As I thought, I will have to break this up into more than two. But we are going to go onward to Hegel's master-slave dialectic and how it is very much das Ich and the Pinata of Fichte, myself, and onwards. And again, as with all of this, hopefully you enjoyed all that. It is useful and helpful in your world, and I will see you and the future Germans, again, post-Lutheran, if I ever see you.